in marketing, you realize that people come from all sorts of different marketing backgrounds. So for me, I used to think that if anyone was in social media marketing, they would definitely know social media. And that's not true.
Hello and welcome back to Future You, the podcast brought to you by graduate careers experts, Prospects. I'm your host, Emily Slade, and this episode we're speaking to Sophia.
So I'm Sophia Tang, and I am the social media strategist at Prospect.
What is a social media strategist?
So I guess the best way to describe a social media strategist predominantly is that they focus on creating a content strategy for social media for the specific brands. So I think it varies depending sometimes with job descriptions and stuff like that, but I would definitely say that it's kind of focused on understanding what social media is about, particularly understanding trends, understanding the algorithms, and how you can basically utilize your knowledge to help create an effective content strategy for social media. So this is obviously kind of considering what sort of content is worthwhile, the different content types to engage with your audience, and effectively you're also working across different teams as well to kind of consider how that might work. So with marketing teams, with a product and sales, to then create essentially like a schedule for it. So
cool. And how long have you been doing that for?
So I've done this job specifically for about 4 months, but I would say that I've been in social media strategy social media itself for about 4 to 5 years.
Oh, okay. Is that sort of, what's your educational history? Is that something that you studied at university?
So I went to the University of Nottingham and I studied international media and communication studies with Mandarin Chinese on the side.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I guess like after that, I kind of wanted to do a broad degree. So I guess something that effectively was kind of would allow me further opportunities, but I kind of was more focused on that media space, and that's kind of what led me to marketing. So in my first sort of role, I was doing more content creation, I'd say, kind of doing digital design, editing videos and filming videos. And then I moved to kind of transition more into the strategy side. So I was doing it originally from like a more agency perspective, where I was working with brands, like kind of working behind the scenes to kind of help create like an overall brand strategy, as well as like working on like kind of organic social to help brief designers to create content for our brands. And then from that, I've now transitioned to more kind of an in-house. So now I specifically work for Prospects to kind of manage their social media platforms.
Okay. So you briefly covered it there, but like what is the difference between a social media strategist and say like a content creator?
Yeah, so I would say that specifically social media strategist kind of leans more to the idea of being like a social media manager. So specifically for my role, I find that I'm kind of working day to day sort of activities which involve like copywriting, scheduling, and I work with a designer in my role to kind of help create that content to then be broadcasted and published. It also kind of involves like community management and sometimes, a bit of like advertising work as well. So maybe I do a bit of paid ads or like boosting and stuff like that. But we do have our own separate kind of like paid advertising team specifically. And then from a content creator role, I think you do find that sometimes with roles that they do overlap, but I would say a content creator role kind of specifically focuses on more the idea of creating that actual content. They might have a consideration of like the content strategy to know how to effectively create the content. So for example, the way you've kind of constructed the piece of content. So an example would be like making a video. You might think about how would this effectively engage with your audience, making it short and snappy and whatnot and stuff like that. But you would essentially be involved in the ideation and creating the content itself.
Nice. Cool. Perfect. So how did you get your current job?
So I was already working in strategy, but I kind of was looking to do a transition from agency life to in-house to kind of focus more on social media in that aspect. It's purely because I think agency life can be super hectic, and I transitioned from like working in central London agency life to now working in Manchester in the house agency. I actually found a job while searching on LinkedIn. At the time, I was kind of looking for a transition whilst I was still in my last job. So it was a bit tough kind of working around hours to do interviews and stuff like that. But I think GIST itself made the process really efficient in terms of kind of the tasks and the process, and also just kind of letting me know when I got the job as well.
So what do you love most about your job?
It's interesting. I've been here for about 4 months, but I think there's a lot of really interesting things about it. So I think one of the things I'd like to kind of talk about is like having the autonomy in my role. Like I think one of the things that I was told when I joined this role was that I could pretty much make it my own and make the social media as my own. I think that came from the fact that prospects initially had somewhat of a social media presence, but not as consistent social media presence. So for me, I think kind of, thinking about what sort of content would best engage with our audience, which is like specifically Gen Z, leaning towards Gen Alpha these days. And I think that's what made it great, because I could really experiment, and they kind of understood that like it would take time, and to build that consistency would then effectively kind of help us engage with that sort of audience, and which would then kind of pull them to kind of go to our websites and whatnot, and kind of learn more about what our brand is all about. I would say also because of the sense of autonomy that I get, I've been doing a lot more content around like videos and stuff like that, which has allowed me to do a lot of traveling. I think for some people can be quite exhausting, but it's also kind of given me opportunities to kind of really go out there in the world and listen to, students' opinions, like really getting that authenticity of hearing like, real experiences. And it's also just been really great also to build that sort of relationship with like employers and also like universities as well, that I've been working quite closely with to do this piece of content. So
nice. So what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think there's so much pieces of advice that I've received that I think is really interesting. But I think the one thing that I would say is like, take every opportunity you get rather than regret. And I think that's one of the things that I've always kind of stuck with me. I'm very much a yes person, always trying to grab as many opportunities. And that's kind of what also allowed me to be someone with very many skills, I'd say. If you looked at my CV, there used to be a joke around me and my friends being like, your CV would be endless if you put all your different experiences that you actually had done in your life. So I think it also just kind of allows you to kind of widen your perspective of the field. So I've kind of been dipped into like various, areas from like PR to working in events, doing a bit of presenting, obviously doing a bit of social media, and even doing the content creating as well. And I think that's kind of allowed me to, really enjoy my role, feeling like I'm not just limited to doing one thing, because I think I'm just someone who's like always like pushing to wanting to learn more and develop myself.
When it comes to your job and your role, what hard skills do you rely on?
So I think it sounds a bit generic, but actually marketing itself is like a really important. So being able to understand social media, the landscape, being able to understand, the kind of developments that are going on in social media, like obviously maybe like Instagram has a new update and stuff, and or maybe like the algorithm has shifted and stuff. And I think it's really important that it's all about experimentation. So being able to try different things and understand how things effectively work helps you kind of get more knowledge into social media. I think the other thing is like reporting. Like it's all great and fun to do all like the content creation and also like the scheduling and like publishing the work, but effectively you're only going to be able to still build an even better strategy by being able to go back, review your work, and obviously think about how you can obviously maybe adjust your strategy to make sure that it's better because of your results. So if you, for example, find that like maybe videos are working better, then you might more likely, lean towards putting more videos and stuff like that. Or maybe you find that maybe slightly shorter, like carousels or content is a bit more interesting. So then that way that you might, reduce the slides that you're having. It's all about just testing, I'd say. And I think that effectively is really important. Also copywriting, I think being able to think of the way that you construct your words to target your audience. So obviously be able to understand what your brand's tone of voice is and how you can attract your audience, because I think copywriting not only kind of goes into the idea of how you construct your words to target your audience in terms of the content itself, but even social media captions, or even sometimes like the stuff that you're seeing in videos and stuff like that will really go a long way.
And so what about the soft skills?
Soft skills to me, I think comes effectively communication, right? So I think communication is always going to be a big one, not only with the way that you communicate to your audiences, but also how you kind of communicate across your team. So I find that not only am I working with my marketing team, but I'm also working with products and sales to kind of help build and, those relationships as well to create content. And I think like people say communication is underrated, but actually, people talk about communication a lot, I'd say, but I would say that like actually being an effective communicator is what's really important, because if there's any like misunderstandings or, even just delegating tasks and the way that conversations that you're having with people will effectively kind of control the way that like your relationships and the way that you work with people will also kind of turn out. So, and then a lot of it I would focus on like time management and organization. I think being a social media strategist can be a bit chaotic sometimes, especially when it comes to like knowing what you want to schedule, the kind of sort of content that you want to be going on, especially when you're running around doing all sorts of shoots and stuff. Like it can be very all up in the air. So I think it's important that for me, one of the big things that I do from an organizational perspective is like I would build like a social media calendar like up to like 3 months in advance just to kind of understand what sort of content I need to be preparing for, like what do I need to film in advance, what do I need to edit in advance. Also kind of just being timely. So obviously we work specifically in targeting a lot of students and graduates, and I would say like as one example, with like A-level results day coming up, then you'd probably want to focus on content like clearing or, you know, the options after graduation and stuff, or, you know, what alternative routes can you look at if you don't want to go to university. So these kind of things are like really important to kind of help engage with your audience and ensuring that, you know, you're relevant really. And then lastly, I think it just comes down to also time management as well, which kind of effectively links with just the whole organizational aspect. So I'd say that like for me, like I find myself doing all sorts of different tasks. So I tend to like block up my calendar for like different time blocks to focus on different tasks just to ensure that I'm, you know, making sure that I'm covering all those different things. Because when you're working so many different areas of social media, I think sometimes it's hard to keep up to ensure that you're doing all those things. So I always try to like schedule time to fit all those different tasks across my calendar over the week.
Cool. Just to loop back to being an effective communicator, as you say, like the word communication and communicator is thrown around so much in the sort of job world, and you honed in on being an effective communicator. What does that look like? What is being an effective communicator? What are the skills with that?
I think it's all about transparency. Also, one of the things that I've recently learned about, especially from like a leadership perspective, is being able to understand and be adaptive of the way people communicate, because everyone will have different sorts of communication styles. So one of the things that I particularly found for myself and also affected by my own personal cultural background is that I tend to be quite blunt and very to the point when I talk about things, but that's also just kind of how things translate also from like my mother tongue. We tend to be very like to the point. But sometimes, like when you talk about things like from like non-British aspect, you tend to be a little bit more, how do I say, maybe a little bit more wishy-washy. Yeah, exactly. Flowery, and
Go around the point a lot more.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've kind of had to consider a lot more of the way that I communicate, but also just, I think, trying to find that balance of being like, when you delegate work, and also just trying not to be too micromanagey. I think that's also quite important in terms of communication. But I think in the end, like I said, I think transparency is probably the biggest thing. Like being able to be clear with what you want, and obviously having that person communicate, ensure that they understand what you're talking about, will then create that effective relationship.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you. So, are there any expectations you've had about your career that turned out to be different in reality?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think that when you go and apply for a job role, it doesn't necessarily translate in every single company. And I think it really depends on what the company has versus like what they expect from you as well. So one of the things that I realized is that even though I've worked in 2 different strategy roles, the job description is very different, I'd say. So like, obviously I was working to create briefs and to designers and stuff like that, and effectively doing a lot more like overarching brand strategy for like a lot of big projects when my agency life. But now I've literally become more like a social media manager, and I have that autonomy to create what I want to do. But it can be hard because like essentially you're working very, very independently as well. And I think also when it comes to like team working, I think as someone who pretty much graduated during the pandemic, my idea and concept of working is really skewed. I mean, I remember when I first started my job, everyone was talking about 5 days a week in the office, and I was like, what's that like? Yeah, I don't know what that's like. I literally started my first job remotely and then switched to hybrid, and now we're flexible working. So I think being able to kind of adapt to that working culture, but not being afraid to reach out to people is really important, because I think it's sometimes like with my role, it can be somewhat isolating. So it's important to, you know, reach out to people. Don't be afraid to bounce off ideas as well. Like, yes, you have a lot of autonomy, but sometimes it's a great way to just talk that I think it's great that like by talking to people, you can help to develop your own ideas, and you don't end up falling into this echo chamber of like pretty much doing the same thing because that's all you can think about. So
Yeah, nice. That's so interesting. I hadn't even considered that. So would you argue that there's also within soft skills that wider, less so empathy, but more understanding of going into the working world and working with these people that have been used to a completely different working way of life pre-2020 than what the now new generation of workers, these entry-level workers, are going to have experienced. And it's about understanding where everyone's coming from in that respect.
yeah, and I think another thing, particularly with marketing, that really surprised me, and it's really bad to say, I'd say, but it's also the fact that like in marketing, you realize that people come from all sorts of different marketing backgrounds. So for me, I used to think that like if anyone was in social media marketing, they would definitely know social media. And that's not true. Actually, a lot of my older colleagues, when I was working with them in like a previous agency, I found that they didn't really know much about social media. Like they knew enough, but I would always be that person because I was the Gen Z person to go to advice when it came to anything related to social media. And that's not to say that like they're bad marketers, but it just also comes from the idea that maybe the kind of experience that they gained in, over the past years was very different. So maybe whether it came to like print or whether it came to like TV ads, where this presence was a lot more sort of a generational shift, I would say, because I think those kind of things were really relevant at that time when they were obviously becoming marketers. But nowadays it's all about social media. So being able to understand and work with people and also be open to hearing about people's ideas is how you kind of learn and develop as a person as well.
Amazing. So what advice do you have for anyone entering into this industry?
I'd say don't be afraid to upskill yourself. Like I think one of the things that I found is that I'm constantly always trying to challenge myself and learn new things, because marketing is such a broad field and you can literally do anything if you really wanted to. So it's important to kind of be able to utilize the different resources that are available. I think the great thing, especially after the pandemic, there's so many free resources as well. And also lots of interesting programs that you can pretty much do remote and like online to, grow yourself. So like personally for me, I recently just did a crash course on like SEO just because I thought it'd be really interesting, especially because we do stuff with the website. Or I also kind of joined a program with Girls in Marketing, which is a digital marketing growth program, particularly because I've already got a bit of experience in marketing. I just kind of wanted to hone in on those skills and like develop them as well. So I think there's some really great resources out there, like FutureLearn, and also like Google offers a lot of interesting stuff, LinkedIn Learning. So I would say that like if you have that time, definitely like take that opportunity to really, build yourself in that way, because I think that's how you, showcase your determination as an individual, but also show to like, any recruiters or people, employers that, you're willing to, develop yourself in this field.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Thank you so much.